Ahmed. I'm working at the legal department at the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. I'm here actually to present a little bit about the new law that was passed recently, and it's the law number 20 of 2020. And the law actually regulated the process of accreditation and evaluation of degrees and certificates from foreign education institutions. And of course, as the case in any law, it is a law that has its positives and negatives. And we'll try to go briefly with each one of them, but I hope that I can give you a little bit of background on law itself. I don't know how many of you actually is with the legal background, but hopefully this will be helpful to everybody, regardless of their background. To start with, I wanted to give you, as I said, like an idea about the law itself. So when we regulate things, we actually put in the provisions, and there is a particular process for the legislation. And in order for this to be a law, there are certain things that need to be available in that legislation to be called a law or a code or any other type of regulation, such as instructions, rules. It has to have certain criteria. And as you see in your screen, the understanding of law itself has certain concepts that are actually acceptable and notions that are acceptable, almost everywhere. And some of these are, as you can see in your screen, for example, the law is blind, meaning that the law does not differentiate between someone and another one. It has to be, common for everybody and applicable to everybody. There is no distinction between one and another. The law has teeth and will bite, meaning that's definitely that you will have to adhere to the law. Otherwise, you will be bitten by the law itself. And that will be in the form of penalties, could be in the form of prison, or in the form of, a fine. It depends on the kind of violation that the person may actually have. What is law? Law in general provides rules. These rules actually tell us what we can do and when we cannot. But it's not as simple as that, because law is not really plain black and white. There are certain things that actually interfere with the law and the understanding of the law, and that those things actually cause the misunderstanding of these provisions. So that's why you have to have some really, really good education in law to understand these. Could be vague provisions, and the vagueness of these provisions could be on purpose, or could be actually accidental, or it could be as a result of the lack of experience or lack of education for those who actually approved the law. So it's a matter of reading the law, understanding it, and definitely you need to know what is for you and what is against you in that law. So, for example, if we're talking about criminal law, which is for us the penal code, number 111 of 1969, definitely you know that you cannot steal. Definitely you can like you have to know that you cannot bribe any person, whether it's official or not official. And these are the common things, but there are other things that you don't know about the criminal law. The law does not accept that you don't know the law. That's the basic rule. There is no excuse as, well, I don't know the law. It's something that is unacceptable. So if someone, for example, steals and he doesn't know that this is actually criminalized, then that's his fault. It's not the fault of the law, because as I said, it's basically a notion that is acceptable, and it's applied almost everywhere, and almost regarding every single kind of legislation, except for certain and specific rules. For example, the internal regulations in one particular, for example, ministry, or in one particular department. Those internal rules are not applicable to anyone outside that department. So everybody else outside that department is not required to know them, because they don't concern them. And we're talking here about different kind of laws. So I gave the example of the penal code, but we have other kind of laws like contract, which is basically the civil code. And these are the common things that we have to know as regular citizens. That's why important for everybody to understand what is law. It's more than rules. Like there are certain rules applied in particular society that are not acceptable in another society. Sorry, was there a question or? Okay. So basically, there are certain things that are applicable to a particular society that is not acceptable in another society. For example, there are certain rules that are actually directly related to, for example, the Islamic law, and any violation of these rules would be a violation to not only Sharia law, but also to a standard law, for example, in Iraq. But if you go and do the same thing, for example, in Canada or in the United States, it is not considered a violation. Why? Because it is developed through the society itself, through the culture itself, and through religion, which is the common thing that's probably applied by the society. And it's important that if you travel and if you go somewhere else, before you do anything, you need to have a particular understanding of the culture of the other country. Otherwise, you may fall into a particular obstacle or a problem with the police. I'll go back to what I talked about probably here. So I was telling you that law provide actually rules. These rules define what you can and you cannot do. It's important to our lives. It's related to anything that is in the criminal law or contract law, which is the civil code. And it's important that you know what is applied to you. Law is actually more than rules. It's something that developed by societies, and societies, for example, the Iraqi society has a very important input into what goes into the legislation. We're talking about if I give examples of what kind of input the Iraqi society has on legislation, we would need a different kind of like a lecture, so we can talk about it. It's important for you to understand the law itself, whether in Iraq or if you travel to another country. So if you go overseas, before you go to any country, you definitely need to understand what this country provides in its legislation of rules. Probably I was talking alone when I was telling an example about a couple that went to the United Arab Emirates, and they were like sitting on the beach, and they were arrested for, I think, drinking alcohol or something like that on the beach. And the UK government interfered, trying to help their citizens. And they were almost imprisoned just because they were doing something that is illegal. They should have understood that the culture of the United Arab Emirates does not allow for anybody to drink alcohol in public. So it's really important if you travel to another country that you understand at least the basic rules, because you're not required to have, or not less, let's not say that you're not required, but let's say, I mean, you're not obligated in a way that you have to have a good understanding of the law, because there are certain parts of the law that are common, whether it is in your country or in another country. For example, you cannot steal in Iraq. It's the same thing if you go to Canada or the United States or to the United Kingdom. And it is also something that you will be penalized for it. So it's important for you not to do those common things. But there are certain and specific rules that apply in a particular society and in a particular country. Those very important for you to understand before you do that. For example, I'll give you another example, which is, for example, if you want to start a business in Canada, you have to understand what is the requirement for starting a business in Canada. So those specific rules are in Canada. It's based on the Canadian law. They may have common things with other laws in other countries, but you have to adhere to the requirements stated in the Canadian law. Moving on, talking about the law itself, we divide the law into different categories depending on how we look at it. So we have common law and statute law. Some people call it civil law. We have certain countries, their law is based on precedents. Those precedents are set by judges in courts, and they actually legislate law through these judgments. So they understand the concept in this case or in this judgment, and they apply it as a law. In statute law, the same thing with Iraq, Germany, France, Italy. They are called a statute law country or a civil code country. These are like required to have a particular legislation regulating a particular situation. Private law and public law, depending on the kind of situation that is, or depending on the kind of process that is being regulated. Private law regulates, for example, contracts. Public law regulates, for example, international contracts or arbitration. Civil law and criminal law. We divide the laws as well into civil and criminal, because civil, it deals with everything that has to do with you as a citizen in terms of contracts, as I said, or in terms of like regular process within your country. Criminal law deals with anything that has to do with with any violation that may occur throughout your life. This is basically just the definition of what is common law and statute law, which I just explained. Law and morality, here we're talking about where the impact of the society on a particular law. So if we're talking about Iraq, for example, there are certain rules apply, a certain culture. What is acceptable in Iraq may not be acceptable in the United States or in Canada or in the United Kingdom or in Germany. It's maybe a completely different thing. So, for example, if you're walking with your wife, it's okay to to hold hands, for example, in the United States or in Canada, but in Iraq, some people may look at it differently. Now, depending on the situation, you may find some people actually suing you for violating the ethics in the country, and this case may be heard by the court. You have to have a good understanding of the culture of the country. Otherwise, you may get in trouble. And the situation I mentioned about the United Arab Emirates is a good example of that. These are the kind of things that the law does in a particular society. It's a matter of regulating life and regulating everything that you do in your life, including which what we will get into, including how you get your education in another country, and what is the impact of that on your life as well as the life of others. We're talking about a government that is making sure the rule of law is the superior rule applied in the country. There is a regulation for almost everything in life, and education is one of the most important parts of life that actually requires regulation. And we will get to some of the details on that. Now, education. If we're talking about education in itself, education is either in your country or overseas. So if you would like to get a foreign education, that's absolutely fine. If you want to get a domestic education, that's also absolutely fine. Now, what's important is that what is the quality of that education? Is it a good quality education, or it's just education? Now, if you're not learning anything from that education, it's not really an education. If you want to get a degree in law, for example, in the United Kingdom, and trying to learn what the country has and has not of any kind of rules, any kind of ideas, it's good. We need that. We need to know what exactly the thinking behind the legislation in another country. But at the same time, if you want a degree in some kind of a specialty that is, it's not relevant to your country, it's not relevant to your society. It's kind of like you may have obstacles, like when you come back to your country trying to have this degree accredited. We want to talk about accreditation process. In each country, there is an accreditation process, an evaluation process for the degrees and for the certificates that you may obtain overseas. If you get your degree, let's say in the United States. The United States did not have a particular authority for to evaluate and say like accredit your degree that you obtained in Iraq until like for some time. From 1973 until 1987, there was no authority to actually evaluate those degrees. You were accepted by the university on its own risk. They were actually evaluating the degree based on what you have studied, and they were like testing everyone in a particular test to see that he's qualified, he or she are qualified to enter the university or enter the school. So I'm continuing with the United States. Until 1987, there was nothing. From 1987 up until now, and 1998, there's now like two bodies. These bodies approved by the government, but actually they're not a government agency. So they provide the authentication process, the accreditation process, and the evaluation whether the degree that you have from Iraq would be eligible for you to study in the United States. Same manner, same way that we do it here in Iraq. So if the Department of Scholarships and Public Relations and Cultural Relations, decide that your certificate or degree from another country is valid and it's valued as a master's degree or a PhD, you'll be able to use that internally inside the country. You will be able to be accepted in any educational institution or even in a government position. For us in Iraq, we have the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research as the ministry responsible for that, and particularly the Scholarship and Cultural Relations. Sorry, it's actually, it's a Cultural Relations Department. These are the ones responsible for the accreditation and evaluation of the degrees. Do we need it? Do we need actually the accreditation and evaluation process? Can we survive without it? To a certain point, yes. Like we can survive without it. But at this moment, no, we do need it. It's definitely important. It's a matter of having a particular person authorized to use the education they obtained overseas to be applied. For example, if I have a student who received let's say, a degree in medicine from the United Kingdom or from the United States, and they want to apply the education they obtained or they learned from there in Iraq, there is a particular process for that because it's something that has relevancy to the lives of people. I cannot allow any kind of education to come into my country, and I cannot allow any person with any education to come into my country and try to apply what he learned, what he or she learned. So if they have that degree in medicine, will they be able to treat people? It's something that has to be decided by somebody with the qualification to decide that. A physician specialized, for example, in child medicine, in developing a particular kind of, medicine to treat people, that person has to have, like somebody testing them, deciding whether they have the qualification to do that. Otherwise, they will not be able to get the license and to practice their specialty. The main question that a lot of people ask, similar to what happened in the United States, where it's actually an NGO, a non-government agency or organization that is doing it. Does it have to be a government agency that do the accreditation and evaluation process? No, it doesn't. But given the situation in Iraq, yeah, we definitely have to have a government agency that do that until the moment or the time when we have a different situation, hopefully different circumstances that is allowing us to have more confidence, more faith in people. At the moment, there is a very, very big gap between people. There is a lack of trust and really don't have faith in each other, unfortunately. And this is actually not something unfortunate because of all of the people, but particular people decided to do certain things and maybe falsify their documentation and leading the increased number of falsified documents presented in the government led to a particular process, leading to more complication, leading to more problems, and that hopefully in the near future we will have less of that. Now the question, should we involve the private sector in the process? Maybe. We always as legal professionals, we're trying to regulate things in a way that protect the rights of the people, but also we're trying to improve our economy and develop our economy, and the involvement of the private sector is very, very important to this process. It's imperative for us to privatize most of the government kind of operations. These operations require the government supervision, but they don't require the government doing them. Maybe having a government doing most of the work is actually a way that is causing more difficulties for the government to control it. So it's better, hopefully in the near future, where we have a better process, where we have more a bigger role for the private sector. Law number 20 of 2020 is the law of the foundation of accreditation and evaluation of degrees and certificates, Arab and foreign degrees and certificates. This law was passed by the parliament, and that was passed in the official gazette number 4068. It was passed without consulting with the Minister of Higher Education, which led to the ministry to be objecting to the law with the Federal Supreme Court. And the Federal Supreme Court, towards the end of 2021, issued a judgment that led to the amendment of the law. We will get into those particular amendments in a second. One of the key amendments is the degrees and certificates of senior government officials. So the previous law, number 20 of 2020, had a rule in which allowing directors, general and even at the level of members of the parliament, ministers, to obtain degrees while they are in office. And that's something that actually at the moment is not allowed, particularly because we understand government officials are required to do a particular job. If they study while they are in office, that will be a conflict, and they are required to resolve it. Now, if they want to study on their own time, yes, we can allow that. It's important that everybody is educated. It's important that everybody is doing whatever they can to improve themselves, but it should not be against what they are essentially assigned to do. So they are assigned essentially to perform public service. That public service would be generally would be in conflict with them trying to study. Now, there were some reports actually stating that this law was passed by members of the parliament because they want to, have their own education, their own degrees accredited and evaluated, and then can be used for their own benefits. We call it the D word, where somebody is actually eager and thirsty for people to call him Dr. John or Dr. Smith. These are public servant. They are required to serve the people, and the basic understanding is that they should actually put that on hold until they end their public service. Now, we have an understanding here in Iraq that public servants actually, particularly the senior government officials, they are also power thirsty, and they would like to stay in their position for as long as possible. So it's good to have such a rule where they cannot actually have their degrees accredited. There were certain rules about the certificates of military and police, where it allowed certain military and police members who have a higher degree, such as a master's or PhD, who would like to teach in a civilian university. That rule is no longer available. It was repealed, and they can no longer teach in a civilian university because the specialty is different. It's kind of like a different scenario. So it's good that it was removed because we should not have that. The previous rules were allowing other ministries to accredit and evaluate their own degrees that actually issued by their own institutes, and it's no longer applicable. There were certain rules actually limiting the powers of the Ministry of Higher Education into doing a procedural process, just doing the accreditation and evaluation, regardless of how authentic, regardless of how relevant the contents of those dissertations or theses. So it's good that we empowered the Minister of Higher Education to have more authority into that. We're not talking about intellectual soundness of the contents, but we're talking about more than that. We're talking about how authentic, we're talking about how relevant to the background of that person. It's really a good step that we actually repealed that particular provision. If there were like exceptions provided in the law, those exceptions given to the minister. So if somebody is not a resident of the country they were studying in, they would be able to evaluate and accredit their own degree and certificate if they get an approval from the Minister of Higher Education. And that's a big loophole. It's actually made for certain people with connections, and they would be able just to, like have somebody contact the minister and trying to, get them exempt from the rules. There were certain exceptions as well to the families of martyrs and to political prisoners, and in terms of residency. And luckily that provision also were removed, with all due respect to the families of the martyrs and the political prisoners. But it should not be, we admire them. We actually, appreciate the sacrifice they've given our country. But we hope that this actually does not impact the education process. It should not have any impact on the educative process. We should have everybody treated in the same way, whether you are a member of the martyr family or a member of, or you are actually a political prisoner. You should be treated, in terms of education, you should be treated the same as everybody else. It's for the benefit of the public. The big question is the current law effective? I.e., is it the missing piece of the jigsaw where it's going to be the solution for all of our problems? In my humble opinion, I think it's actually caused more problems than resolved problems. So we should go back and discuss and review every single point of that law to decide whether we need a more robust, a more detailed process. We should, I'll give you an example actually that happened in the United States. At one point, law schools are actually limiting the seats of the students that are accepted in those schools. In 1 year after 2020, like I think 2020, toward the end of 2020 or beginning of 2021, one of the law schools, because of the COVID-19 situation and the financial difficulties that it caused, one law school decided to accept an additional 100 students. So there was a big case for the media to actually criticize that law school. The law school had the justification for it, which is the financial difficulties, and it's understandable. But the bigger question was, what is the impact of having an additional 100 students with no job? Because everything has to do with the planning. Even law number 20 of 2020, as well as regulation number 3 of 2018, they always talk about planning. We have also law number 14 of 2009. These laws actually talk about planning. So the government should plan for what kind of education, how many degrees they have from each specialty, for each specialty. So medicine, how many degrees do we need from domestic universities, and how many degrees do we need from foreign universities? This kind of planning should go on a higher level from the Council of Ministers level, as well as the Parliament level, but it should start as well with the Ministry of Higher Education. They should sit and discuss it and design a plan. At least there should be a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan for how many degrees we should have, what are the kind of degrees, what are the kind of countries we should accept. I cannot accept any country or any regulation that is being taught overseas to be applied here, and or to be, let's say, publicized here, because it could have an impact on the government direction. I mean, in Iraq, and particularly post 1980, as well as, or maybe more in 1990, and even bigger and more post 2003, the planning for education actually started deteriorating, and we didn't have a proper planning for the education system. We have our population increasing to over probably now 45 million people. We don't have the infrastructure to accommodate all these people. It should be planned better. It should be planned better. And certain examples that happened recently, and I'm giving those examples here in Lebanon and Iran. Yes, I cannot, apply that to everybody, because I know, and I know personally some people who came from Lebanon and came from Iran with the degree, and they have really, really good understanding of the law, and their degrees were actually, helping them into their future. But the common thing is that there is a big problem with the education over there and how they teach the students, and it should not be allowed to be, accredited and evaluated in Iraq because of many reasons. And hopefully these will be resolved as soon as possible. But the question that I wanted to answer from start is law number 20 of 2020, the missing piece of the puzzle, or the missing piece of the jigsaw. It's definitely not. That's the answer. It's definitely not. And hopefully we will have a better process, a better regulation regulating that. And I want to thank you for listening. If you have any questions for me on a particular slide or a particular situation or an idea that I discussed, please let me know.
While you are discussing or thinking about questions, I'll post the link for the attendance. So go ahead and sign your names.
Good evening, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for your lecture. I have one question for you, if you hear me.
Yes, I do.
I wonder when the Law 20 will be out of service, because I think it's, it is from 2 years, they decided to, work with it for 2 years, and most universities now, in my University of Baghdad, one of the universities that doesn't, nominate any of the students for the Law 20, as you know. So when the Law 20 will be out of service. And by the way, I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, it is not fair that more people that have a high connection will be nominated according to the law. So I hope it will be out of service soon.
Okay, we hope that actually it's amended or repealed by a better legislation. We hope there is currently no particular plan. As I said, we always lack planning. I don't know, maybe we talk to the to Dr. Hazem at some point. Hopefully and discuss if there are any plans to replace the law. But at the moment, I don't see anything coming that way. And as you said, yeah, it caused some difficulties with the universities and even time, because the process itself, without any obstacles, it's going to take about a year. And if we're talking about certain difficulties coming from members of the parliament or maybe other ministries, there are voices within the government that actually would rather to have a weak law than a strong law and a strong process. I don't know who, I don't know what they do, but it's important for them to keep the way it is. I hope I answered that.
Thank you. One more thing to Mr. Ahmed.
Yeah.
If you can suggest, if you are related to the studying abroad or in Iraq, it is possible to say, you know, to have a law that ensures that the three first students on the top of their department, to ensure them to, you know, to study overseas or inside in Iraq, and, you know, without any difficulties, you know, with regard to have the approval of study, because we are suffering, you know.
Yep.
Especially those who are, you know, work at government institution.
Yeah, we actually do that. We do have such a regulation at the moment. It's the we allowing certain students who are top in their class. We allowing them to continue their education. Now there are particular, you know, details that require more kind of regulation, because we have like a large number of students. It's really difficult to regulate based on the legislation that was passed when the population of Iraq were about 10 million or 12 million. You have more people, you have more needs, you should have more institutions. And we do have really good and smart, you know, like students who would like to continue their education. And I think there should be as I said, like the most important thing is planning. Planning is the one piece that we're missing. And hopefully there will be more details into that. You can go back to regulation, to decree number 518 of the Revolutionary Guard, the dissolved Revolutionary Guard, and they allowed students who are ranked, I think 80 or above, or they have a degree of 80 and above, they entitled to continue their education, as well as 14 of 2009 allowed students who obtain, I think 80 or above or 90 or above, to continue in their masters, to continue their education for PhD directly. So it's a matter of planning, I think, and the regulation exists, but it is scattered across different kind of legislations. It has to have a particular process to be organized and coded, so we can have it in one legislation organizing that. So it's a good idea to have that. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ahmed. Thank
Yep.
you.
Welcome. Anyone else? Okay.
Don't forget to sign your names. I'll post the link again for people who just attended. We're doing this informative session about.
No, thank you.
Thank you for this is important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
And I hope in the future you will come out with different, sessions about different laws, because this
Full
is very.
thanks, dear Doctor.
What's that? Did I say that again?
Full thanks, dear Doctor.
Oh, full thanks. Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you're free to go if you signed your names in the attendance sheet. Thank you very much again, and good night.